Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to one of our first programs after the conference. Today we are very honored and privileged to have with us Professor Sameeh Hammoudeh from Birzeit University. Known Sameeh for over 25 years. Very distinguished academic researcher, and we're very privileged and honored to have him with us today. I also want to thank our co-sponsors for this event, BARQ for Research Studies. An organization that's also dedicated to research. And one of the areas of research is Palestine and the state. It's been occupying Palestine over 70 years. But the topic today is a very important topic because it establishes the authenticity of Palestine as home for its indigenous people. It's titled Ottoman Palestine: Issues, Identity, and Politics. And Professor Sameeh will speak for about 4 or 5 minutes or so. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. And as I said, it talks about Ottoman Palestine. That means we're talking about the 19th century.
السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين. I'd like to start by raising a question, which is why we have to study history. What is the importance of studying history? And how this reflects on our current life. First of all, we are ordered by the Quran to go into earth and see about the nations before us, to take the wisdom of them, to learn the lessons of other nations, because history is the experience of other nations. There are certain rules which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in social life, and these rules do not change. If we understand them, if we see how they affected the human lives, the human societies, then we can benefit from them. This is from a general point of view. Another thing related to history is national identity. The identities of current nations are very much influenced by their history. So we see how nation states today serve historical studies and publish about the majesty of their nations, the positive sides of their nations, the accomplishments they had during history. It's very important in the political view to establish loyalty to the society. If I have a history here, if I am a member of a nation that has a history in a certain land, then I have loyalty to that land. I love it, I defend it, I adhere to the system that is operating this society. And on this issue, we can see how the Zionists used history to establish their own nation state. They actually had or established their own narrative about the history of Palestine. They went back into 3,000 years ago and claimed that they are the owners, the legitimate owners of this land, that this land belongs to them. And they started within the Western archaeology about Palestine, establishing this narrative that this is the land of the Old Testament, the Torah. And now, current days, we see that Israel very much is working on this subject. And there is a very famous book that relates between makes a relationship between archaeology and the establishment of Israel by Kate White, an American scholar. Also, history is very important for us Muslims to understand how we failed to protect Palestine and to protect other countries, how we failed to protect ourselves from Western invasion, how they destroyed our unity, how they occupied our lands. They took our wealth, and until now, they are controlling our lives. How did this happen? We cannot answer this without going back into history and studying the elements, the characters in our own personality that enabled them from doing that. We don't say that they have magical powers, that they can do anything they wanted to do, or they did anything they wanted to do. No. We have also to look into ourselves. We have to have an inner review for our past and what we have done, so we lost after we were the first nation among nations, after we were the leaders of humanity for long, long times since the establishment of Islam. So that's a very basic issue that we have to understand, that history is not a social science discipline that has nothing to do with life. Actually, history has very much to do with our lives. And such, we have to be aware of it, of its importance, and work with it so that we can succeed. Now, if we come to another issue about Palestine, why Palestine? First of all, we have to reject the nation-state history, which means we adapted without our will, or without being aware of that. We adapted the way the West is looking at us. They look at Egypt as separate from Syria, Syria as separate from Palestine, Palestine as separate from Lebanon, etc. So actually they divided us geographically and politically. Also, they are dividing us in our awareness, that we have to feel we are not the same. We are not one ummah. So if I have a concern about Palestine, this should not be a concern for a Turkish or an Afghani or an Irani scholar. And actually they succeeded in that, because if we look at the social sciences, especially history, we don't see a history of the whole ummah that discusses the subjects as related subjects, intertwined subjects, but as a separate subjects. Because our mindset is according to the nation state, not to the Islamic ummah. This is very dangerous, because it makes the West, or it gives them the ability to keep us separate from each other, to keep this power divided, and does not make a challenge to their domination, to their colonialism, to their aspirations in our lands and our ummah. So Palestine actually is an example of a place where it's important to study that as a study case for the whole ummah. It's not a unique place. It's not a unique place within the whole ummah, but it has certain characteristics that are important, which we have to identify and point out to. But we take Palestine as an example. What did they do in Palestine? Why we failed to protect Palestine? What is the relationship between Palestine and other Muslim nations? Why is that important? Because to solve our problems, we have to go to the origin of the problem. We have to solve it from its roots, not from the upper appearance of this problem or what it caused for us. Now, for Palestine, it has a very important position within the Muslim Ummah because of its religious importance. Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, Makan al-Isra, the place of the Isra of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as the origin of other prophets, including Prophet Musa alayhi salam and the Prophet Isa, Jesus alayhi salam. So Palestine is not important only for us, but it is important for other religions, religions that has very great people affiliated with them. Millions of people who believe that this land belongs to them, that they own this land, they have to have control over this land. On the other hand, we find that the Muslims in their history, especially during the Ottoman period, they did not refuse the existence of these believers in other religions on the land of Palestine. They allowed them to live, and what we call now in political science citizenship. They were actually full citizens without any discrimination. They felt that they are Ottomans, as the Muslims felt the same thing. They did not feel that they are excluded from the society, that they are a second class in this society. And this brings us again to the narrative that the West used for history to establish its current claims in the Muslim land. First of all, they would say that Islam and the hukum of Sharia is oppressive. It was against the will of the minorities of other religions, and they have to protect non-Muslims from the Islamic law, from Islamic rulership. And this gave them the ability to interfere, or the right to interfere according to their own mindset. So when we go into history and study what kind of relationship existed between Muslims and non-Muslims in a Muslim society for 400 years, because the Ottoman Empire, or Ottoman state, occupied Palestine in 1517. And they left Palestine actually at the date of 1970, December 1970. So we have 400 years of an Islamic rulership over Palestine. Now, do we have resources to show people what actually was there? Do we have resources to defend ourselves or establish our own narrative against the Orientalist narrative, which is a political narrative? It does not seek the truth. They want to do their political aims. And this is what Edward Said in his book Orientalism actually proved, that Orientalism is not objective. They have their political aims, and they wanted to show a perception, a picture of other nations, so they have the right, according to this narrative, to occupy and rule over these nations. And Palestine, other Arab lands, were part of this scheme. The sources for, or the sources for the Ottoman history on Palestine are very rich, but many of them, or the vast majority of these sources, are not used. Why? One obstacle is that the Arabs looked at the Ottomans in the late Ottoman period as oppressors, as occupiers, as a colonialist state, and this continues until now. If you say Turkey, if you say Erdogan, if you say anything about Turkey, they would say the new Ottomans, the new elite or ruling elite in Turkey who wants to re-establish the Ottoman Empire. So they will oppose that. And they narrated history as if nothing was achieved on ground during these 400 years. And actually the Zionists benefited from this narrative, because 1 week ago, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, was saying, when we came to this land, there was nothing. There was no life. everything is destroyed. People live in very bad conditions. And this gives him the privilege, him as a leader of the Zionist state, the privilege of saying, we are the ones who made Palestine on this current stage. We are the ones who made success, we made development. So we are a blessing on the land and on the, even the Palestinians who are living in this land. Because we took them from poverty to richness, from diseases to healthy life, etc. The main source which I am using in my studies about Ottoman Palestine is the Sharia Court in Jerusalem records. We have 430 records. Actually, these records are very big books that were used to write down, to record every single case the 4 judges at the court looked at and ruled. So we have Kataba, the writers on the Sharia court. They would sit and write down first draft about the case, who are attending, who are the witnesses, who are the people coming in front of the judge claiming against each other. He would summarize the case, and then he will go back to this sigil, to this record, and write again a final copy of this case. So we have 430 of these records that starts from 1530 till 1918, by the beginning of, or the end of 1917. The pages may go for 700 pages, 500, 800. So we have a very, very rich source to study the daily life in Palestine, which I call the micro history. And micro history is much important than macro history. Now, the current studies about the Ottoman Empire, most of them are on the macro level. The macro level, they talk about the sultans, the political issues, the wars, invasions, all of them. And you have this in most of the books about the Ottoman Empire. But you don't have the opportunity to look at the society on the ground, at daily life, how people think, how people interacted, what things concern them, what did they produce, how did they build their houses, how about the crime. Many, many issues are registered in this Sharia code. And the scholars or researchers, they don't find it fun to go into these records and study them, because the writing is very bad. I mean, it's sometimes it took me 1 hour to write 2 lines. Arabic, but in a very bad to read them, yes. I said to write, sorry. Yes, it takes long time to read these records, which we call hujjah. Hujjah is the summary of the case, and to get what is there. But actually, it is fun when you succeed in reading as much as you can of these, and you reconstruct the picture. You find out that you have, for instance, I searched my own village and my own family, and I was able to find out all of my grandfathers, who's the son of who, because the Sharia court mentions them in cases during the time. So I was able to find until my last grandfather, his father, till the beginning of the Ottoman time. And I wrote a book about Ramallah, Ottoman Ramallah, which I choose to discuss the issue of Christians in the Ottoman Empire, which is very important in our relationship with the West. And we know that the invasion of Lebanon, Syria, Palestine started with the claim that Christians are oppressed. Western powers, France, Britain, Russia, they wanted to protect these against their own rulers, and they started to penetrate the society by establishing churches, schools, hospitals, convincing these people not to have wealthy to the Ottomans, to have wealthy for them, and we have a lot of problems that occurred because of this. We had the 1860 massacres in Lebanon, where the Druze fought against the Maronites. The Maronites were with France, and the Druze were with Britain, because if France and Britain were competing on the control of Syria, they let these people fight each other and kill each other. We have thousands of people who were killed from that time. And until now, we find that the relationship between the Druze and Maronites is basically based on these events. They hate each other because what happened more than 150 years ago. As such, going into the details of life can answer so many questions about the condition of Palestine, and can answer the question, what went wrong? What went wrong? I try to address some of these issues regarding Palestine, which I claim or assume that this may be a model to study other parts of the Muslim world, or Bilad al-Sham, or al-Iraq, depending on the Sharia laws. First of all, we look at the structure of the society. The Ottoman society in Palestine was a very much ordered and structured society. You have on the leadership level, you have the ulama and a'yan. The ulama, the Qadi, the Mufti Hanafi, which is the first Mufti, and the Qadi, you have 4 Qadis on the 4 schools of Islamic fiqh or Sharia. The ulama also, you have the teachers and mudarrisin who give religious lessons, interpretations for Islam in Al-Aqsa, in Al-Haram al-Ibrahimi, in other cities, and they are related to a whole order that uses waqf, the Islamic waqf, where they get their salaries from their waqf, or they get their salaries from people when they go to the court, they pay a certain fee, or from the As-Surra al-Sultaniyya, where the Sultan will send them a huge sum of money to spend every year on the ulama and the a'yan, the poor, the schools, all of that. So there had been a very good order for the society. It was not, as many people claim, Palestine and other countries were left. Actually, Israeli scholars, they claim that Palestine was ignored. Never was important to the Ottomans. On the contrary, when we study the records, we find that Palestine was very much important for the Ottoman leaders. If we look into the issue of waqf, which is very important to keep these institutions running, religious institutions and institutions for the poor, we find that the Ottoman sultans were concerned about these institutions. They wanted these institutions to keep going and going, although the Mamluks are the ones who established these institutions, schools, taqiyya, like in Sulaymaniya or other places, the taqiyya, where they give food every day, 3 times a day, for certain people in the society, for travelers, for anyone who wants to eat from the taqiyya. They just go and eat. How you can provide the funds for this? By the Islamic waqf. And the Ottomans paid a great attention to the waqf. They made an organization for this waqf where you have records and you have people who will work on registering everything, going to the villages which are a part of the waqf that they have to pay the ushur, the 1/10, of their income for the work. They will go and see how much they produce. They will take this and put it into their work. Spend it according to the will of the worker, the person who did the work. And we have in Palestine, actually in Jerusalem, a very big taqiyya, which is by the wife of Sultan Suleiman al-Qanuni, Taqiyat Khaski Sultan, his Russian wife. And it is working until now. Until today, they are giving food and other stuff for the poor. And we have, of course, the taqiyya of Al-Haram al-Ibrahimi, which is also working until now, where they have their big kitchen and they do food for the poor and the visitors, travelers to their land. So first of all, we have the ulama and the a'yan, who are actually the mind of the society, the rulers of the society. So we have this kind of relationship between the center and Palestine. The center is the Ottoman Sultan and his administration, and the periphery or the countries around the center. This relationship is based on respect. It is not a colonialism. So one of the questions that we can, or one of the assumptions that we can defeat from studying these records is that the Ottoman rulership over Palestine was never a colonial rulership. It is not colonialism. Why? Because the concern of the Ottoman Sultan is not to get money from Palestine, but to give, to protect the religious situation of Palestine as a Muslim country, as a place of prophets. So there had been so much attention to the graveyard of Prophet Ibrahim and his sons and their wives. Very much attention. And even they will come and visit, the officials, and they will make sure that nobody is taking the money or abusing the waqf for his own interest. We have so many hujaj in the Mahkamah Sharia where officials were punished because they will take some money for their own families or their friends or neighbors outside the people who are registered to deserve from this waqf. Now we have the population, and as you know, there had been so many divisions or organizations, institutions that ordered the life of the public. On the religious level, we have the Turuq al-Sufi, where you find people who follow Abu al-Hasan al-Shadili or other religious Sufi figures, or Jalaluddin al-Rumi, very much respected with the Ottoman rulers. Actually, there is a methodological problem with Western theories, how to interpret history. We see that the spiritual side of a human life is ignored in theories that deal with history, how they interpret history. If you look at Marxism, they concentrate on economics. If you look at the liberalism or realism, the realist school, they talk about the strategic aims and economic interests of the state. So you find within these theories, you find people as animals who are fighting over wealth. How about the spiritual life? There is no talk about spiritual life. So when they come to interpret the Ottoman history in Palestine and other countries, they never take into consideration this spiritual life. Whereas when we look at the sultans, for instance, Sultan Salim al-Awwal, he was the one who occupied Palestine and kicked the Mamluks because of the oppressive regime outside Bilad al-Sham, Masr, Iraq, Egypt, Iraq. Sultan Salim was a great lover for Sufis, and he established many zawaya in Palestine. One of them is in Safar, for instance, Zawaya al-Asadi. And he went to Damascus, he asked them, where is the grave of Muhyiddin al-Arabi? because he had a great love for Muhyiddin al-Arabi, and he established a compound of a mosque, taqiyya, and madrasa for Muhyiddin al-Arabi, and established waqf for that, which is existing until now in Damascus. So actually we can challenge Western theories and Western methodologies in studying history by looking into our own history. And this is one of the great things which, what's his name? Professor, the decolonization of the Muslim, of the Muslim mind. Richard Falk. This is very important for us, is not to put ourselves into Western theories and Western methodology and Western terminology. We have to look into our history within the framework of our own religion, where the relationship between me as a Palestinian, as an Arab, with a non-Arab, with a Turkish or an Afghani or an Irani man or whatever from this Muslim world, is based on a spiritual relationship, on love, respect, mercy, not on just economic interests, that if you benefit me, I benefit you. No. This is part of life, but there is another part which they ignore. So the relationship actually between the center, the Ottoman center, the Ottoman rulership, and Palestine was based on this spiritual side. And this is why we find in the orders of the Ottoman sultans, many of them were published in Arabic in the past 10 years, where we find these are orders from the Sultan, directed to the rulers, that he was very concerned on the stability of the Muslim societies, the security of the life, the ability of people to travel from one place to another without being afraid of others attacking them and taking their belongings. And this was very crucial issue for the Ottomans during the 400 years. The issue of Hajj, for instance, maintaining the Hajj and keeping the Hajjaj coming from all over Asia and Turkey to Mecca through Bilad al-Sham, to keep them secure from people who wanted to take what the Hajjaj have, the caravan they have of wealth and belongings. So we go back to the level of the public. We find that on the religious life there is an order. There is an order, and the sheikh of the tariqah, would be appointed from the center. It is not something that anybody can claim, anybody can take by force. No, Shaykh al-Islam and other religious leaders, they have to approve anyone taking the leadership of the tariqah. And we have on the Sijil of the Mahkamah Sharia where some of the members of the tariqah, they go and make complaints about the Shaykh of the tariqah, that he is not giving them enough food, that he is not allowing them to have rest in the Zawiya or other stuff, and the Qadi will even fire him or give him a warning that you have to do the job you are hired for them. So in fact, we can say that on the religious level, there was also an order. On the economic level, you have a tawa'if, the tawa'if al-Hirafi, the people of production, they're producing. So, for instance, in Najjar, the carpenters, they will have their own ta'ifa and their own sheikh, and this sheikh will be appointed by the Qadi. The Qadi will approve after asking the other members of this business or this kind of production. Take this for all kinds of things. And you find that hiring another one, if the sheikh died, it goes into a democratic way. It's not something without an order. There should be a way to hire that person, and the people who work in this kind of production, they will choose and elect their leader. Everything is order. Everything has laws. Nothing was with disorder that may cause disruptions for the society. Now, if we go to the issue of, on this subject, the issue of why we fail, we find that the ulama and a'yan, started to imitate and adapt Western life. And this came late, because if we look at the history of the Arab world, we find that the Arab world before the Ottomans was isolated from Europe. There was no connection or great connections between the Arabs, the Muslim Arabs, and Europe before the Ottomans. Now the Ottomans, they started their civilization or their empire on the borders of Europe and expanded inside Europe. Then they went and occupied in the 16th century the Arab world. So this was an opportunity for the Arabs to have interaction with Europe through the Ottoman areas. And in the 18th century, we find out that many of the elite in the Ottoman Empire, including the elite in the Arab world, including the elite in Palestine, they liked the, let's say, the way the West was developed and their life, and they started to adapt. So they looked for more wealth. They looked for more wealth, and we find that this changed their position. Now we can say that the spiritual life became money. They started to look for building palaces, having very much slave girls and pleasure. Pleasure became a central issue in their lives. And this corruption, which started by the ulama and a'yan actually, corrupted the relationship between them and the villagers, where we have in Palestine about 75% or 70% of the people are, they live in the rural areas. They are cultivators. They grew the produce for people to eat. So the relationship between those people who are looking at modern life and those people who are struggling to get their own food and the food for other parts of the empire or other parts of Palestine. And we find this during the Mandate period, for instance. During the Mandate period, we find a division between the people of the city and the people of the villages, the rural area. Urban versus rural. They didn't love each other, they didn't like each other, they didn't trust each other. So we have, for instance, if we study the history of Palestine during the Mandate period, we find that in the 1936-39 revolution, most of the people who revolted against the British were from the rural area, and they started to assassinate these figures, the elite of the cities, because they hated them. They asked them for huge sums of money they couldn't afford to pay, so they started assassinating them, which made a division where Britain was able to destroy the revolution for that reason. And this started from the Ottoman period. If we go into other details, we find one important issue, which became a reason or an element for decline, which is the ignoring knowledge and the importance of knowledge. We have very much schools, many schools in Jerusalem around Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. We see that in 18th century, 19th century, these schools will close and they will become houses for the sheikhs who were teaching in these schools. They will take them as houses for them, and their sons will continue occupying these houses until now. They will no longer teach people. So we find the illiteracy among Palestinians very high, where nobody can read except very few who will go to some schools that continue to work until that time. And this is very important issue in studying the elements or reasons for the decline of the Muslim nations under the Ottomans. So we can say that the Western penetration of human life started at a certain time and continued. And the society was dysfunction, disunite. Conflicts and struggles between different sectors of the society started by that time. Now, if we look at another issues regarding the Ottoman Palestine, is the issue of the Jews. How did the Jews live in Palestine? Well, first of all, we find in the Sharia court, there was no differentiation between an Ottoman Jew and a Muslim Jew or a Christian Jew. All of them will have the same rights. And I have many cases regarding Christians and Muslims where the Qadi will rule for the Christian or for the Jew against a Muslim because he has the right. And there was not a single case to discriminate between these religious figures. Actually, Amnon Cohen, who is a big Orientalist, a Jewish Israeli Orientalist, who specialized on Ottoman civilization and Ottoman history, he wrote a book from the Sharia court records about Palestine during 16th century. He called it Palestine during 16th century. And actually he studied the Jewish community. He didn't find a single case where the judge ruled against the Jew because he's a Jew, or used bad language about the Jews, or did not give them the right to live the way they wanted to live. And he shows that this community was very much ordered within the whole Ottoman system. They lived their life as the Sharia, the Jewish Sharia. He talked about the Maslah. What is Maslah? The slaughterhouse. He talked about the slaughterhouse, where the Muslims will leave the slaughterhouse on 2 days a week, will leave it for the Jews. They will come and clean it according to their kosher way, and they will bring their priests or hakam who will say their prayers and bring their own knives, everything for them. Everything. Not a single Muslim will go there in these 2 days. They do their butchering, clean, take their stuff, and go. He found that the Jews, even their money, gave them the opportunity to make rashwa. If they want to take something that does not belong to them, they will use rashwa. They will bribe a certain official. And they want to take that, where the Muslims will discover that, they will go immediately to the judge and put their claim, and the judge will make an investigation and give the right to their owner. Very fascinating stories, where a Muslim, for instance, had a Jewish neighbor. He built another story, and he opened a window on the yard of the Jew, where the women move. They move inside their house. You have the house, certain rooms around the yard, which is closed, and they move freely in this. Nobody can see them. When this Muslim opened this window, the Jewish man went to the court, and he made a claim. He complained about this, and the judge ruled for him. He said, you have to close it, because you cannot look into his woman. You cannot penetrate his private life. Many, many cases that shows let's say, the majesty of Islamic Sharia, which is very important now in our current political struggle with the secularists and other nationalists who say the Sharia is backward law. No, actually we can give the example, a very real example from these records, where the Sharia is superior than current laws. The Sharia is not something that came to oppress human beings, but to make their life happy. This is one issue regarding the Jews. We do not find any claims in the Sharia court that a Jew came and said, this man took my property because he claimed he's a Muslim or otherwise. Even we have cases where a Muslim may use a bad language against another Jew, he will go to the judge, and the judge will punish a Muslim for doing that. Nothing outside the issue of citizenship, which now, let's say, current political systems talk about and try to apply. We find it totally implemented during the Ottoman time. Other issues related to Ottoman Palestine is the economy of the society. We find hundreds in each sijil. We find hundreds, if not thousands, of hujjaj cases that talks about the economy. First of all, people are encouraged to work, produce, because they have protection. No one can take away the property of other people. We have actually cases where the Sabahi is the police man or the police officer, will use his power to take certain things from the villagers because they don't have weapons, they don't have protection, or this is the way he thought that he can take their property or benefit from their produce for nothing. Take their horses, take their cattle or whatever. And we find many cases where they go to the judge, although the judge does not have an army, but he has the upper hand. And this is something ended by the Islahat Tanzimat, the reformation of the Ottoman system, where they made another court beside the Sharia court, and that was one of the issues that caused the decline of the Ottoman Empire, because they started to adapt Western laws in these courts and to refer most of the cases outside the Sharia court. So the Qadi was weakened by these reform orders. The villagers actually felt protected by the Qadi, because whoever wants to take away anything of their property, the Qadi will stand beside them, will defend them. And this is very much important to proceed in cultivating the land and saving the land. If you feel that whatever income you will have from the land is not for you, you will not work. As what happened in China under Mao Zedong, where he applied socialism and people felt that they are working not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the state. So they will have much less food, and millions will die because of that in China. Now in Islam, the Sharia court and the Sharia law actually protected the villagers and did not allow any of the officials, the powerful officials, to go and put his hand on their property. Also on the economic side, we find the issue of money. The issue of money, how people dealt with money, where you cannot use usury. I mean, there had to be an interaction or an exchange regarding money, that no debts with usury, with riba. So people will give each other money if they need for a certain period of time, and if this person who took the money, who I mean, in debt for another person, he did not pay, he will go to the judge and he will order him to pay. If he cannot or doesn't want to pay, he will put him in jail until he pays the money for the real owner. Okay, we can go on and on for a long time to talk about the Ottoman Palestine, but in summary, I would stress the need to revisit the 400 years of Ottoman rulership over Palestine. To revisit also the way that we look at this history, to have our important questions and try to answer them. And this is not an easy job to do. It cannot be done by one individual. There has to be an attention from scholars, Palestinians and non-Palestinians for these issues. Because these issues are, the claims of Western powers are based on these issues. They occupy our life because they have their own narrative for our history, for our laws, Sharia, for our way of life. They consider us outside civilized, non-civilized. This is why they come the white man burden. They have colonialism over the world to develop these people, these nations. And look at the way they look at us in their cultures. You find out that this is a historical matter that is continuing. And they disregard us, they disrespect us because of these narratives. If we are able to defeat these narratives and produce our own, I think we can have an opportunity to have a better interaction with Westerners, a better spread of our Islam, because people will see the truth about this religion and how was it working during history. Thank you very much, and hopefully we can
Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation, actually. And now we're opening for questions and answers. I will start with Zaim, the moderator. He talked a lot about spiritual life, social life, economic life, but I would like to know more about the political setup that was taking place. So the Sultan would send his orders, who would receive them, how would the political interaction was taking place before the Palestinian period and after the Palestinian period, and if this was the real reform or was it something along the lines of Western political visions, where it actually affected society and especially the relationship between the urban and the rural.
Okay, the political orders, they will come from the Sultan to the Ayan and Ulama. So at the top of the order, he will say that this is directed to the Qadi, the Mufti, and other Muftiin, the Mudarrisin, the Qurra, those who read the Quran, and the Ayan, which means also the merchant, the people of power in the society, and we will tell them what to do. That this is my order, and you have to adhere to it, you have to apply it. Now, they have the authority to tell the, let's say, the army or the officers, the security officers, security apparatus, if they need them to implement any of these orders. They have the authority over them. These people, they have to listen to what the ulama will tell them to do. Now, actually, people had respect for the order of the Khalifa because they consider this a religious duty. And this makes us able to answer the question, was the Ottomans colonialists or not? Because if you have a colonial rulership and they give you an order, you don't abide to it with your own free will. You will hate it and try to evade from it. But no, we see that people will consider disobeying the Khalifa is kind of kufr, because you are disobeying Wali al-Amr, who's in charge, and you are disobeying the one who is in charge of protecting the Sharia. So they will take it within a religious context and they will adhere to these orders. Actually, there was no problems within this until the Tanzimat, where, for instance, Sultan Mahmoud II was called the Kafir Khalif. They considered him infidel because he adapted the Western fashion, Western uniform, and started to adapt French and Swiss ways of life and other things. So this where the division started to begin, where the Westerners started to penetrate the elite of the society. And by occupying the mind of the elite, they can expand more and more their controlship over institutions, over land, over. For instance, in Islamic Sharia, the ownership of land was prohibited for foreigners. They cannot own land. If you are an Ottoman, regardless, Jewish, a Muslim, or a Christian, you can own land. Now, the Western penetration, the Western influence, forced the Ottoman Sultan to make new rules where they are allowed to own land. And this was one of the reasons why Zionists were able to buy land in Palestine. It was forbidden. Then, by Western influence, it became a legal issue, a legal matter to have it. So we can say Western penetration to the elite was a major reason for the decline of the Muslim Ummah and decline of the Ottoman civilization. And I see it now. If we as Muslims want to develop ourselves, to have our own independence, we have to break Western domination over us. We have to live according to our own tradition, our own cultures, and our own religion and beliefs.
I studied the Ottoman Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. The system of the Milli system, the Milli system, which was the source of social structure that was overtaken by the nation state, that brought a lot of hegemony and a lot of tranquility and a lot of good relationship between the members of
different religions.
All of them, they have their own privacy, but at the same time they were subject to the sultans. You didn't touch on it, and I think that is something that needs to be wrote about, because it really brings about the best of the Islamic mind, which they have created vis-a-vis the deal of the minorities as they speak in the West.
You are right. I didn't touch on it that deep because of time, the limitations of time. But I talked about it. Actually, when you study the relationship between different religious groups, you find that the Milli order was very successful, because in your religion, in your practice, you are free to do whatever you want to do. And the Hakam Bashi, who is the head of the Jews, also the Patriarch, who is the head of the Christians, they will have control over their own community. They will guide them for their own benefits and in their life. One of the examples, which is very important to see the beauty of this system, is that the Muslims were required to go to the army, to fight. Whereas the Jews and the Christians were not required to fight. And this made the Christians more prosperous than Muslims. And this is one of the issues I address in this book, the village of Ramah. They became very much prosperous than other Muslims, because their young people stayed working on land, doing business. Whereas Muslims, they would go to war and never return. If they don't want to go to war, they have to pay a great sum of money. So they will sell their land. Who will buy their land? The Christians will buy their land. So this is one of the things that we can mention from a positive side, that the Christians were able to develop much faster than the Muslim villages or groups, which is also part of the Milli, where they have their own rules. They don't have to do the same things as the Muslims have to do.
We know from Ottoman archives that the number of Jews in the late 19th century was about 3%. Did it go up or down? Did it go up before that number?
Now, during the time of Sultan Abdul Hamid, the Jewish immigration increased a lot. The Jews came in big numbers to Palestine after the Spain, the collapse of Muslim Spain, because the Christians, the Catholics, they expelled them outside of Spain. So the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid made an order that we welcome these people, oppressed people, Muslims and non-Muslims, to our empire, and they went there. He let them live in Istanbul and other cities. They came to Tabariya, Tiberias in Palestine, Safar, Jerusalem, Hebron, and they started to live within the Ottoman Empire, within the Ottoman. There was no Zionism at that time. So they were not thinking of having sovereignty over Palestine. There was no restriction on them. Now, during the time of Sultan Abdul Hamid, he noticed Zionist activities in the world. And actually, you know, Abdul Hamid was very careful ruler, and he has his own spies who will give him reports about what's going on around him. One of the things they informed him about is the Zionist movement. And he met with Herzl, the leader of Zionism, suggested to him or offered him a huge sum of money and let him buy Palestine, the whole of Palestine. Buy it. He refused, but he allowed the Jews to come where they were oppressed in Eastern Europe and Russia. He felt that this is a tradition on the Ottoman Empire to let the oppressors come to the empire. The oppressed to come to the empire and live as other people. But for the Zionists, he forbade them from staying more than 3 months. He tried his best to prevent the Zionists to penetrate Palestine, but the rulers, officials, actually, many of them were, they agreed to be bribed by the Jews and let them come to Palestine and stay. So the problem started actually after Zionism, where they would come to Palestine and establish their colonies.
But in terms of numbers,
We do, but I don't have this in my memory.
Thinking about your doing an excellent job, Sameeh, looking at this archive. 30 years ago, I done a little bit of that at Al-Khalil, Mahkama Shar'iyya. But I was interested in indexing at that point for research, and so to use the Mahkama Shar'iyya record is an excellent primary source for looking at the history of the Ottoman. My question, it's simple and complicated at the same time. Did you find, I'm trying to be academic here, this is what I mean by complicated. Did you find in these archives a description of the geographical unit during the Ottoman of what is known now as Palestine? Was any, and for example, when Sultan Salim or Sultan Abdul Hamid, this is from the beginning and the end, when did they use the term Palestine, and geographically what it means? And my question is, this is where the complication. Did you find any unit, geographical unit called Palestine during the Ottoman period for 400 years or no?
Well, actually, these records are concerned about Jerusalem and its neighborhood. We have many hujjaj about Gaza. They will do the judges of Gaza will do the ruling there, and they will come and register this in the Sharia court in Jerusalem because they feel that it's very important. They have to keep it in Jerusalem. But imagining Palestine as it was during the Mandate period was never brought into these records because people will live within the wilaya. A wilaya is an administrative issue. It has nothing to do with nation state. So the concept of Palestine as a nation state came during the colonial, not before. So you cannot talk about Palestine as a nation state, as a separate from Syria or Lebanon during the Ottoman time, because all of the Ottoman time, there were no borders between Palestine and other countries. People who lived north of Palestine, they had daily interaction with what we call now Lebanese or Syrians. But they did not define them as separate groups. Who divided them as, the Cyprus people agreement, where they made these borders, artificial borders, between these neighboring countries. So the concept of Palestine actually, in Islamic geographical sources, talks about the Ramla area, Ramla. So Palestine as a concept referred to Ramla and its neighborhood, and sometimes extends to Gaza, including Jaffa and other. Never there was a clear-cut borders for what we call now Palestine. This happened during the colonial period. But belonging to the land of Palestine was something the Muslims mentioned as belonging to the Holy Land, to the place of the prophets, to the place of Masjid al-Aqsa and its neighbors.
So we are applying what happened after the colonial period to the Ottoman.
Exactly.
Yeah,
which is a very much problem. As
Still,
I mentioned before, we cannot
still
study history as a history, the history of the Muslim Ummah as a history of nation states. So you cannot understand the history of current Palestine without understanding what was going on in Egypt, or in Syria, or in what is now Lebanon, or in Hijaz, because the interaction was as a Muslim Ummah, not as nation states. So people will migrate, for instance, from Cairo and live in Jerusalem. We have an Afghani community in Jerusalem. We have Turkish families in Jerusalem. Now they are Palestinian Arabs, but originally they came from these areas of the Ottoman Empire.
So maybe this is fine, just to finish this. So this means that when we look at statement related to Abdul Hamid, or to Salim or Suleiman, and mentioning the word Palestine, we should question this to make sure that this was used by them, or we are putting words in their mouth at that time. I think.
Yeah, I think they addressed the wilaya, al-wali. The first one to receive the order is al-wali. Al-wali has his own borders, which we administer this area, not other areas.
For instance,
what were the borders?
They will mention them. I mean, they have.
Even North Palestine was all part of Beirut.
Beirut,
So there was no borders.
even now this area was part of
Dr.
Beirut.
Bahd Sabri, he wrote, I think, his speech on the geographical of Palestine during the Ottoman, and it was wilayat, so it was not a national state.
So, but before the Tanzimat, there wasn't as much distinction. All these things during the Tanzimat were the north, the middle, and the south. But it wasn't an exact border. It was understood what the generally.
Same in the Romans, before the Islamic conquest, before Umar ibn al-Khattab, there was 3 Palestine, called Palestine 1, Palestine 2, Palestine 3. Basically, when I looked at the maps of this, we are talking of Nakab, Beersheba, Gaza. This is Palestine 1, and then you have Palestine North, and you have Palestine the middle. And this is where one of the statements of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when we go to early Muslim period, when he sent Amr ibn al-As to a certain area, he said, "Alayka bi-Ilya wa Filistin." He was mentioning Ilya, that's what the Romans Bayt al-Maqdis at that time, and Palestine, which he means the north of Palestine. It was coming from Medina. You come to that certain place. Amr ibn al-As.
You mentioned the relationship between the Christian, the Jewish people, and the Muslim. Can you please explain a little bit about the Christian and Jewish relationship? This is the first question. The second question.
We don't have.
Second question.
The second question is like when we track the image of Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, some Muslim thinkers or ulama like, for example, like Kawakiri, like Malik bin Nabi, they don't show any, so to speak, respect for the Ottomans. So what is the reason for this? Even Malik bin Nabi, for example, considered the time when the Ottomans started, this was the decline of the Ummah.
No, he is wrong. I mean, the decline of the Ummah started by the Western penetration to Muslim societies, to Muslim mind, to Muslim culture, which began in the 19th century. And we had in 1839 where the first Tanzimat started. And from that on, if you study the history of the Ottoman law, you find that a certain deviation from the Sharia started from that time, adapting Western laws. And that was the beginning. The start of the Ottoman rulership over Palestine, because I talk about Palestine, was a blessing. Because during the late Mamluk time, people were in disorder. And they were poor. Even Ramallah, when I talk about the history of Ramallah, Ramallah was occupied by Muslims during the Mamluk time, and Sultan Qalawun made it the trees of Ramallah, the gardens of Ramallah, waqf for Al-Haram al-Ibrahim. Now, during the late Mamluk time, people fled Ramallah because they have to pay very much, a lot of taxes, and they have to give their sons to the Mamluk army to fight the Ottomans. So they fled Ramallah and went away. When the Ottomans came, they made rehabilitation of Ramallah. They brought some tribes around Ramallah to live there because they were concerned about the income for the Haram Ibrahim, because it is waqf. So Ramallah was living again and developed from that time. It was a blessing for the Muslims to have the Ottomans, because order was all over the place. Even Christians, which I talked about in this book, they migrated from Transjordan, from Al-Karak area, to Palestine to live in Palestine because they saw a great attention by the Ottomans for Palestine, ta'mir, reconstructing Palestine, reconstructing the buildings, the waqf, everything. So actually the Ottomans were a blessing for some 150, 200 years. Then the decline started later, when they started to lose in wars against Western powers, in Russia and yes.
What about the relation between Christians and
Okay, now the relationship between Christians and Jews needs much more study. I have here in this book, I mentioned two hujjas about the Christian and the Jew, where they go to the court. The first one is a Christian who gave money to a Jew doctor, eye doctor, called Kahal. He had a problem in his vision, and he paid this Jew a certain amount of money, and he told them, you will recover your vision. He didn't. He paid the money, he didn't recover his vision. So the doctor, the eye doctor, Jewish eye doctor, failed to cure him. So he went to the judge, he claimed that he took my money, he didn't cure him. And the judge said, you have to pay him back. But he deducted the money for the expenses, the money for the medicine itself. That was one case. Another case, a Jew was passing by, there was an old road to Jerusalem, from Jaffa to Jerusalem, through the city of Ramallah. And he was attacked by some thieves. They took his stuff. And he claimed that these people are from Ramallah. So they went to the court, from Christians. They went to the court, and the judge asked him, do you have any proofs for that? Do you have any witnesses? Do you have any evidence? He said no. Then he asked the people of Ramallah to have an oath. Actually, the people of Ramallah at that time were Muslims and Christians, and He accused one man, a Christian man, and a Muslim man. No evidence. He asked them to make an oath. They didn't do it. The Muslim made an oath over the Quran. He said, I never took his stuff. And the Christian made an oath over the Injil. The Injil case. I never. And the judge said, sorry, I can't give you anything. I cannot force them to pay you anything. So this kind of interaction was, but you need to study more. If you have another, other hujjaj, you can find, I think it was a normal relationship. There was no conflict between Christians and Jews at that time.
In the 19th century, Egypt went through mixed courts, and this was also at the influence of
exactly, and in Palestine, in Syria, everywhere.
I'm trying to see how did it get into Palestine when there was Spain control of
the Ottomans they changed the legal system. They started to make other courts civil courts. First of all, they did not allow the judge to look into murder cases. They referred this to then they made the trade court regarding trade issues and commercial issues and other stuff. And they started to weaken the judge year by year until he became only looking into marriage and the social issues.
And we talked about Christians, this means basically Christians, indigenous Christians.
Yes.
What about foreigners, missionaries, and other consulates?
Okay, these people, according to the Sharia record, they made a lot of conflict between the Christians.
When did they start?
They started by or let's say by the Egyptian occupation of Palestine, Muhammad Ali and his son. Muhammad Ali, to implement his scheme of making an empire and expelling the Ottomans out, he wanted to please the Christians, to please the West. So he treated the Christians in a different way. He privileged them. He gave them authority, offices, and etc. And this, on the first hand, caused problem between Christians and the Muslims for the first time. For the first time, we see this jealousy between the Muslims, because this is a minority who are preferred by our rulers. By the end, in 1840, when the Ottomans were able to kick the Egyptians out of Palestine, the Westerners continued to come. At the time of the Egyptian rulership over Palestine, they gave the Westerners the ability to come, migrate to Palestine, establish schools, build churches. The Ottomans could not stop this. This continued after that, after 18. So we can say the 19th century. Now, when they came as missionaries, all of Palestinian Christians, or the vast majority, maybe 99%, were Orthodox. They started to take them to the Catholic Church, to Protestant.
Orthodox belonging to which church? Their own or?
Their own. This is the traditional church in Palestine, the Orthodox. And they had a patriarchy in Jerusalem, which had control over them. So there had been a conflict between this group of people, and we see, I discussed this in the book, that the people of Ramallah were divided, and they would start fight among each other, burn the trees of each other, even kill each other because of this effect of Western missionaries in Palestine.
You mentioned that Ramallah was occupied by the Muslims. So do you consider like a rural Muslims as an occupier?
No, this is the
So it's very sensitive.
literal meaning of occupation. It's not as a political concept. That you go occupy a certain place, you live in it.
Yeah, you mean
Living, not
not
from a political perspective.
Yeah,
Dwelling
they
in
live
Palestine.
there, dwelling, not occupying in terms of political complex.
They have authority over them.
Unlike what happened. Any other questions? final question. What would be the implication politically to learn about the 400 years of Ottoman control over Palestine and how it changed over time to our current situation? Learning this, how does it work?
I think the most important thing to learn from this history that we cannot solve the problems of Muslim nations as separate from each other. We cannot regain Palestine by the Palestinians or by only Muslim Arabs or neighboring countries. We have to re-establish our loyalty to the Muslim Ummah. Collective memory, collective loyalty, that this problem concerns every single Muslim in the world. If we do that, we can fight Israel on the political level, on the economic level, on every level. Because now we find many Muslim countries, they have excellent relationships with Israel, because they don't feel that the Palestinian question is their question, their problem. They have their own nation state that has interests with Israel. So why not to have relationships with Israel? Because the concept of Muslim Ummah is not there. If we regain this concept, we work according to it, we can solve our problems. And we say we are not going to expel all of the Jews out, but we are to dismantle the sovereignty of the Jews over Palestine. They can live. The Zionist institutions, they can live in Palestine, as in before. We will not prevent them from that, but they will not have domination over the Muslims.
So the connection between Jerusalem and Istanbul and Gaza and Cairo is all one area that was connected together. They tried to separate it.
Exactly.
To be easier to occupy.
Divide and rule.
It's interesting because from Casablanca, a traveler can go like Ibn Battuta, goes all around the whole Muslim world without a visa.
Right.
Can work in place,
Without the passport.
can marry every place. It's an amazing entity.
Yes, and that was real.
Which we lost.
The unity was real life. And people will have marriages across all these nations.
I said from the West.
Trade that goes goods.
Once again, thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful picture.
I open.
And
I open.